Let's suppose that you are the Fortigate firewall admin at your company, and your boss comes at you and says the following. Look, we're going to have an audit next week, and one of the requirements is that each department must have its own firewall with its own network, which essentially means that IT department should have its own firewall and its own network. HR department should have its own firewall and its own network. Finance department, you get the idea. The challenge is that we don't have budgets to purchase one firewall for each department. So we already have firewall, Fortigate, and I need you to solve this problem for me. And you're like, fired, right? Or not. Or you can just instead use what is called as firewall VDOM or virtual domains. You see, in Fortigate, they have this amazing feature that allows you to create multiple virtual firewalls inside the same box. So you don't have to purchase additional firewalls. You can use your own box and then inside of it create as many firewalls as you want. Well, not as many as you want, because then they will be competing for the resources in the host. It's like using virtual machines inside your computer. So in this case, we are referring to firewalls, creating virtual firewalls inside a firewall. That's crazy, right? And before I show you how to do this, there are a couple of requirements that you have to take into account. First is that virtual images, they don't support VDOM. They kind of do, they kind of do not, but I just say that they don't support. They support what Fortigate calls as split VDOM, where you have one VDOM dedicated for management and there is another one dedicated for data traffic. What happens is that this doesn't apply in a production environment, or like in this scenario that we are creating. What you want to use is multiple VDOMs, and multiple VDOMs, they are supported on appliance only. This is a Fortigate appliance. That's what's 201 model, and this baby boy supports up to 10 virtual domains. So let's power on this baby boy and we're going to start the configuration from zero. Okay, we're going to log into Fortigate using the console interface. So I already changed the default credentials. So if we want to manage this using the graphical user interface, we're going to use the management interface, and by default Fortigate we will assign an IP address on the management interface. So we can change either the IP on this management interface using CLI, or we can put or place our computer in the same subnet. So if you want to know what is the IP address or the subnet, just run the command show system interface management. Okay, and you can see that's the IP 192.168.199. So our computer must be in the same subnet. We can just change it. And right now this interface is on VDOM root. Okay, so I'm going to bring a browser so that we can log in to this Fortigate, and we're going to provide the basic information just to set up Fortigate. So I'm going to change the host name to firewall FGT. What else? Yes, okay. So right now it doesn't have anything happening. So if we look at interfaces, so these are all the interfaces, and right now there are no policies created. Now if you want to know all the steps required to enable VDOM or other features on Fortigate, Fortigate or Fortinet actually makes this very easy for firewall admins or network admins. So if we go to system and settings, here we can see some links that have all the steps to the feature that we're trying to enable. So a couple of things I'm going to change first. I'm just going to change the time zone to my time zone, and also idle timeouts. Just don't want it to log out too soon, and also the theme. So I'm going to use Neutrino. No, that's not good. Yeah, probably graphite, dark matter. Yeah, that's great. I prefer this one. Now, if we go to this setup guide on how to configure virtual domain, it's going to take me to Fortigate's documentation. And this is very important and very easy as well, because it takes me directly to Fortigate, the current version I'm running. So that's very important. And the task that I'm trying to do. So as I said earlier, so there are two VDOM modes. One of them is split task, where you have one VDOM only for management and the other one for manage traffic or data traffic. But the one we want to enable is multiple VDOMs, and by default most Fortigate units support up to 10 VDOMs. Okay, so we can see all the steps required to enable Fortigate VDOM. So we have to use the CLI for this, and we're going to enable it. Okay, so if we go back to VDOM, we can edit using the web page. And so what I want is to, let's see, config. Let's see, config. I'm already at config system global, so I can just edit VDOM. Actually, that's set VDOM to multi-mode. Okay, and then end, and it's going to kick us out of this session. Okay, so now if we log in again, our Fortigate now is operating in VDOM mode. So I'm just going to cancel this, and look at this. Now we have this new option here, VDOMs, and we have root VDOM only. Now we have root VDOM, and we have also a different part or a different section that is referred to as global. So if we click on here, we see we have global and we have root. So global, this is where we're going to perform most of the changes that affect the box. Now, settings related to each VDOM will be done on its own specific VDOM. So if we go to global, I didn't change. Yeah, so we're in global. And so actually we were in global, so let's change to root so that you can have an idea of what it looks like. So you can see you have few options on system, and initially all the interfaces, everything is assigned to root VDOM, and we're going to change as we need to do so. Now if you go back to our support documentation, they actually have great examples here that we can follow. So as I also explained before, is when you create VDOMs, they will be competing to use the host resources. So you might want to limit how much resource you want to allocate to each VDOM, but in this video let's just keep it simple, keep it stupid. Okay, so just going to set to no limit by default. And so they have some use case here that I want to use, and that's going to be the multi VDOM. So we're not going to use split test, so I'm just going to jump to multi VDOM, and you can see the different examples that they share. So we have company A, company B, we have one VDOM that has access to root VDOM or directly connected in this root VDOM, and we have another one for a different company. So we can have these per company, we can have this per department, we can have this per service. It's up to us. Okay, the example we're going to use is meshed VDOM. So we're going to create two VDOMs, one with its own service. So we're going to be network A, and the other one is going to be network B, and then we're going to allow communication between these two VDOMs. Okay, so if we click on next, we should see the example here, how to configure this, and that's the use case we're going to use as well. So we're going to use on VDOM A, the internal network 192.168.10.0, and on VDOM B, we're going to create, we're we're going to allocate an FTP server. So I already have 2 computers sitting on these networks. So now it's just a matter of configuring the Fortigate. So go back to our Fortigate and we go to System, VDOM. So let's create both VDOMs. So let's create a new one and let's name this as VDOM A. And so I'm just going to leave this to Portugal, not Poland. And going to create another one that's going to be VDOM B. Okay, so just change this to Portugal. Okay, so now we have 2 VDOMs. So go back to our documentation. So it says that VDOM A should have this subnet. Okay, how to do this? So actually they did a great job. They have all the steps here. So if we click on next, we have all the steps to configure all we need per VDOM. So first thing first, we have to create this subnet address. So I'm going to assume that you are already somewhat familiar with Fortigate, but this is going to be a very easy to follow tutorial as well. So first we have to create this object, internal network. So in order to do that, we have to go into VDOM A. Oh, there is something there. Oh, I used to dash. I need to remove that. So let's go to System, VDOM. Can I edit this? No, I can't edit the name, so I have to delete this. Yes, no problem. Let's do it again. And it's going to be VDOM B. That's right. And I select just Portugal and okay. No, that's better. VDOM A, VDOM B. So now let's go to VDOM A and we should go to policy and objects addresses. Okay. So here we should get this name. That's going to be a subnet. So I'm just going to follow all the steps there. So address, going to pass this and also the subnet. Copy, back, paste, and it says port 1. Okay, and we don't have port 1. So is it a problem? Actually not. Recall that by default all the resources, they are in root VDOM. So we can't use a resource that is already assigned to a specific VDOM. We have to detach that resource first and assign to the VDOM that we want. So we're going to cancel this and go back to global. And here on global, let's go to network interfaces. And we have port 1. So port 1, we're going to change from VDOM root and we're going to assign to VDOM A. Now I already know that we're going to need also WAN 1. I'm going to do the same for this interface. So scroll down, WAN 1, and let's change from root VDOM to VDOM A and press OK. Now I also know that the subnet or the object we're trying to create is on the network 192.168.10.0. I'm just going to set this firewall as the default gateway for this subnet by assigning the IP 192.168.10.1. So here I'm going to change 168.10.1/24, and I want to enable ping on this interface and press OK. Now, okay, let's go back. So what we have to do, okay, we have to create this again inside VDOM A. So let's go back to VDOM A and on policy and objects addresses, create a new one, address. Okay, just going to pass the name, and I'm lazy today, so I'm just going to copy and paste. And now if we select the interface, we see port 1. Okay, so I'm going to press OK and save. So we have the object internal network inside VDOM A, and this object is not as well inside VDOM B, and I can show you that. So if we go to VDOM B addresses, we don't see internal network. Okay, so each configuration that I'm doing now is just to that specific VDOM, but when I make changes using global VDOM, so I can affect all the other VDOMs, but if I'm doing it specifically on that VDOM, it won't affect other VDOMs. So we have privacy there. So let's go back to VDOM A, because we still have a couple things to do. And I have here the explanation how to do in case we want to use CLI. So if for some reason we don't have graphical user interface, or we just want to do it using CLI. So now we're going to create a static route again. And by adding these pointing towers when one, we already have these. I'm just going to copy the gateway and go back. So static routes, they are in network, static routes. We're going to create a new one. Okay, we're going to change the gateway to be this one, and the interface is going to be when one. Okay, so let's save this. So the gateway is 172.20.201.7. So I'm just going to place my WAN1 IP in the subnet as well. So we go to interfaces, WAN1, and the addressing mode we're going to change from manual, or to manual in this case, and let's see, it's 172. So I'm just going to copy and paste to 1 and say this is /24. Okay, and press OK. Recall that initially I assigned the IP to port 1 using global VDOM, or the global layer, but I can also use specifically this VDOM to change the IP address. So let's continue, and what we have to do now, so now we have to create the policy. So that's what we're going to determine what we're going to allow our network to access. So going to copy this VDOM A internet. So let's go to policy and objects, firewall policy, create a new one. Just going to paste this. Now the direction is from port 1 to WAN1, and let's go and do this. So port 1 outgoing WAN1. Okay, the source is going to be that object we created before, so internal network. Okay, so we're going to click on the source, let's select internal network, and the destination, well, is the internet, so we're just going to allow all. Also the service will be all in this case, as you can see here. Okay, and we want to leave net enabled. Okay, we're going to save this change, and I believe that's everything we need for VDOM A. Now we should see the same steps or similar steps on VDOM B. So on VDOM B, as we saw, it has an FTP server on this network 192.168.20.10. So first thing first, we need to assign port 2 and WAN2 to this VDOM. So let's go back to our Fortigate and global VDOM. Let's go to system VDOM. Actually, no, that's network interfaces, port 2, and we're going to change to VDOM B, and the network is going to be 192.168.21/24. I want to enable ping on this one, so let's save this. And WAN2, well, I don't recall what is the WAN, but we can already change this to VDOM B. Okay, and let's save that. Now back to our documentation. So we have to create this object. Okay, so let's go to VDOM B, policy and objects, addresses, create a new one, and let's copy the name internal server access. Okay, no, that's the policy, that's not what I want. So okay, that's the one, internal, no, that's to add state routes. Okay, that's what we want. So FTP server, that's the object name. Okay, so copy and paste, and this type is going to be subnet, and that's going to be the server IP address. So I'm going to change here, and this server is reachable via, so that's not what I should be using. Actually, should be default, that should be here. Yes, so I'm using too many shortcuts on the keyboard, so that's FTP server, that's the right one. Yes, 2010. Yes, port 2. Okay, and that's it. So now the next step is to create a virtual IP, because this is an FTP server, so we want to allow internet access to this server. So we have to create a mapping between the external IP to the internal IP of this FTP server. I'm going to copy this and go to virtual IPs, create a new one, and that's going to be the name. Now the interface is going to be WAN2, and let me copy this already. That's going to be its public or external IP address. So the interface will be WAN2, and that's going to be the external IP address. So that's not good. Yes, it's better. Now what's going to be the internal IP address is the 192.168.20.10. Okay, I'm going to paste this and save. So we can see if anyone in the internet wants to reach this FTP server, they're going to do it by using the IP 172.25.177.42. Okay, so now we can create what? A state route. So that's going to be our default route. Just going to copy this to be our default gateway. So we go to network, state routes, create new, and I'm going to pass this, and the interface is going to be WAN2. I'm just going to assign an IP on the same subnet, just because we're going to edit this, change to manual, and IP let's set to 1. That's going to be /24. Well, yes, everything's okay. The next step is to create the policy. So we want to create the rules that will allow that communication to happen. So I'm going to copy the name and go back to policy and objects, firewall policy. I'm going to create a new one and paste access server. So the incoming interface, that's going to be WAN2 to port 2, and the destination will be our FTP server. So incoming interface WAN2, outgoing interface port 2, source is the internet, so you're going to set to O, and destination is going to be our FTP server. Now the service here is going to be FTP, and let's just confirm that, and that's okay. So we want to also leave net enabled and save this policy. Okay, there's a lot happening, I know. So far what we did, we creating 2 VDOMs. Hey, let me show you. So we created 2 VDOMs, VDOM A and VDOM B, and they don't have any communication with one to another. So computers on VDOM A, they have internet access through WAN 1. Computers on VDOM B, they have access through WAN 2. So we are able to meet the requirement of allowing those departments, those companies to have their own firewall inside the same box. Now, this gets better. In some situations, we might also allow communication between these VDOMs. So, for instance, we have the FTP server, and the guys in VDOM A, in the IT department, they need to get files from this FTP server. One way of doing this is by using the internet and then logging into the FTP server using the internet. In some situations, this might be the case. Should be the only way to do it. But in other cases, we can also allow the communication directly inside the VDOM. And to do that, we use VDOM links. So VDOM links is what allows communication between inter-VDOMs or intra-VDOMs, not inter-VDOMs. Okay, how do we do that? Okay, if we go to configure the VDOM link, recall this is a mesh topology. So to VDOM links allow connections from VDOM A to VDOM B. Okay, so how do we do it? First, we go to global VDOM, and on network interface, we're going to create a new VDOM link. So it's kind of an interface, okay? So let's go back to global VDOM, dashboard, not dashboard, global. Okay, network interfaces. So we're going to create a new VDOM link. Okay, so it's going to be the name for this VDOM link. So I'm going to copy the name here to make our lives easier and paste. So we're going to have interface 0 on one VDOM and interface 1 sitting on another VDOM. And the virtual domain on first link is going to be VDOM A, and the virtual domain on the other side is going to be VDOM B. Okay, so that's what we have here, and we can do it using CLI as well. So we're going to save this, and next we want to create, okay, we kind of have the routes to get from one point to another, but what do we want to allow? Which traffic do we want to allow? So that's the next step. We have to create the policy, but before creating the policy, we need to create the object. Okay, so we're going to create the FTP server object on VDOM A. Recall that VDOM A doesn't have this object, so we'll have to create it. I'm going to copy this, and I should take all the characters. Let's go back to VDOM A, policy and objects, addresses, create new address. I'm going to paste this, okay, and the IP is 192.168.20.10. Okay, I'm just going to paste this, and this is reachable how? You guessed, through VDOM link 0. Okay, select VDOM 0, and we want also to enable state route configuration. I'm going to save that. Okay, next step, we should create also, what is called this, state route. Okay, so we're going to use the FTP server object that we just created and set the link to be VDOM link. Okay, so if we go to network state routes, we're going to create a new one named address. So we're going to pick the FTP server object. The gateway address is going to be 00. The interface is going to be our VDOM link. Okay, so let's press OK, and now we have the state route to reach the FTP server. Next, we have to create the policy. So we're going to copy this access FTP server. Okay, and let's go to policy and objects, firewall policy. We're going to create a new one. That's going to be the name. Now the incoming interface is going to be port 1, and the destination outgoing interface is going to be VDOM link. So let's do this first. So port 1, the outgoing interface is going to be VDOM link 0. The source is going to be what? Our internal network. Okay, and the destination is going to be our FTP server. Now, what do we want to allow? Which service? Well, we can be specific to say only FTP. Okay, and we have to disable net. So all of these steps are here. So the destination, the service, the action, and we have to disable net. So we don't want the internal network to be translated to a different IP. So we're just going to perform state route directly. Okay, now we're going to do similar steps on VDOM B so that it knows about the internal network. So I'm going to copy the internal network name. Let's go and save this first. I don't want to lose all these changes. And now let's go to VDOM B, policy and objects, addresses, create new. So you already know the steps, right? So paste, the sub is going to be a subnet, and subnet is going to be 192.168.10.0, and this is reachable via VDOM link 1. And I want to also enable state route configuration. Okay, next we're going to create what? State route. Okay, so let's go back to network, state routes. We're going to create a new one named address, the new object, internal network, interface, VDOM link 1, and .c. So we have the state route and still missing what? The policy. So we're going to create the policy internal server access. So let's go back to policy and objects, firewall policy, create new, paste. Now the incoming interface, this is coming from internal to FTP server. So if we see here, we should choose VDOM link. Okay, so let's go back and select VDOM link 1. The outgoing interface is going to be port 2. The source is going to be our internal network, and the destination is going to be the FTP server. Now the service is going to be FTP. We want also to disable NAT on this direction, and we can save this policy. So I believe we have everything required to enable communication between VDOM A and VDOM B. Now, is it going to work? Let's see. I have two computers, one acting as the FTP server, more like an HTTP server, and the other one will be the client on the network 192.168.10. So this is going to be a quick test. So I want to enable, instead of FTP, I'm going to also allow HTTP. So let's go back to our policy. So I'm going to change, or actually let me just add, because we can have multiple services in the same policy. I'm going to save, so we have to allow on VDOM B and also on VDOM A. Let's go to VDOM A, and we're going to update our policy, allowing internet network to reach FTP server on HTTP. Okay, done. Now I can go back to my PC where we're going to perform this test, and let me just bring the browser, and we should be able to reach the FTP or HTTP server. So that's 2010, and it works. So as you can see, we can use VDOM to segment networks by creating virtual firewalls inside the same box, and we can also allow communication between these VDOMs in case we need, and be specific to which traffic we want to allow. And this feature is actually used in different use cases. I've seen this in ISP, MSP, small companies, big companies. So different customers, they might have different requirements. So take your time on understanding and playing with this feature, and see if probably you don't have to buy a new firewall, but instead creating new virtual domains. So I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.